All right, everybody, what's going on? Welcome to the Houston Ensemble podcast. We are here today with the great Uriah Kriegel, professor of philosophy at Rice University. I had the pleasure of meeting Uriah at Mercantile Coffee Shop where I work. I was able to sell him an espresso one day and learn that he taught at Rice, my alma mater. And I wanted to have him on the podcast. And as I read his bio more, I realized, wow, we're really into the same thing. So Uriah, thank you for coming. Really appreciate you being here. Why don't we just kind of jump in, and just for those who are listening who don't know you at all, can you give us a little background about yourself, your growing up, education, and how you got to Houston?
All right, so grew up in Israel. Discovered philosophy, I suppose without the name philosophy, discovered it at 13. I remember walking around thinking, who's to prove that there's a world outside my head? Like Matrix style thoughts that I think many people kind of think about at some point. But it kind of just didn't let me go, and it seemed a lot more interesting than all the stuff I was studying at school.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I was 14, 15, I learned that there is something called philosophy, which is about the kinds of things I was worrying about. And so I remember skipping school to go to the municipal library to read philosophy books, because there was no philosophy at school.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I came to college in Israel, I knew if the world will pay me to philosophize, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll have to improvise. And so I studied philosophy in college, then did a PhD in the U.S., because I heard that in the U.S. you can get paid to do a PhD.
At Brown.
That's right.
At Brown University.
And then took up a job at the University of Arizona. Got a little bored with Arizona, moved to Paris to teach in Paris, taught 7 years in Paris. And I have 2 small kids now, and the kind of childhood they could have in Houston seemed to me, at least for the early part of childhood, like the better situation, all things considered, for them. And anyway, I get bored with a place every 5 years. So if it's up to me, I'd move every 5 years. So This is how I ended up in Houston.
That's cool. And you attended Hebrew University in Israel and then Tel Aviv University for your master's? Right. I've always wanted to go to Tel Aviv. One thing is that I'm vegan, so I'm primarily plant-based. And everybody that goes to Israel tells me that there's a lot of vegan food because of the religious laws and the separation of the meats and the dairies and that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. I wouldn't guess it's about the religious laws.
Oh, really?
It's just that the Middle Eastern cuisine is kind of vegan.
That's true too, yeah.
By default. It's like a lot of chickpeas and hummus and tomatoes and cucumbers and potatoes and eggplants, and that's a meal.
Yeah.
Now you can do more. Can I ask you why you're vegan?
I became vegan when I got to Rice University. I had wanted to for a while. Even in 6th grade, I told my mom I want to be vegetarian. And I didn't even know why. Just a natural inner urge to do that. And, then in 6th grade, I was eating my rice and beans at lunch. And I was already a little husky. And one of my friends said that his mom said, I'm going to get fat if I just eat rice and beans. So I threw that out. But then in high school, my moms stopped eating red meat. And we didn't eat a ton of meat, but we still definitely did. And I wanted to be vegan. They didn't let me. I'm not going to get enough nutrition. And then I got to college, and one of my really great friends was vegan, and so I just started immediately. And for me, it's definitely been a journey. It's been about 5 years now. And at first it was more about health and sustainability and a little bit about the animals. But actually I feel like since then, through these past years, I've actually changed it all to animals. More so because I personally love animals like so much. Maybe even more than humans to an extent. Or I feel something very intense regarding them. And I know that I couldn't kill an animal. Now, of course, if I had to, and we're in the wilderness and we're surviving and all this, of course I'm going to kill an animal to survive. But I also feel the best, and I do think that it is, and there's evidence for this, it's not a think, it is, like the least inflammatory diet. You want to keep your body generally alkaline. Not that this beer is keeping us alkaline, but do what you can. And I just feel good that way. And I eat a lot of chickpeas, a lot of hummus. That's pretty much my staple, actually. And even from a spirituality aspect, in my reading and in meditation and stuff like that, I feel like when you consume, especially in America, this is actually more specific to America than other countries, there's so much negative energy that is input into the sacrifice of the animal that we also consume that negative energy. And a lot of people, including myself, think that as we consume this energy, it manifests in our culture. And it's not the only thing. It's not the sole reason by any means, but that's my big thing about it. And also, it is more sustainable and it is better. You can be healthy and eat meat. I know that for sure. But, like when I went to Japan, in Tokyo, I was vegan. But I know that Japan does it better than America regarding their fish and their cleanliness and things like that. So it's also slightly a protest, for America's meat industry. And I just don't want all those chemicals or anything. It's so multifaceted.
You listed like 5 or 6 different reasons.
Yeah.
I like, I vibe with like 4 of them at least. My wife calls like mass farmed meat hate meat. And she's like, she's not vegan, she's not vegetarian, she just says, we don't eat hate meat here. And I think her thinking is about like this kind of bad vibes that are getting absorbed into the system, into the organic system. I remember taking a jog in Sydney,
Australia,
one of the places I lived. I lived there for 3 years.
Oh, cool.
And I remember jogging, I think it was September 16th, 2006. And I grew up in a house where it was meat and potatoes. My parents were French, so meat and potatoes every dinner. And the idea of like going 3 days without meat just wouldn't occur to you. And so I remember going on a jog. In the middle of the jog, I was thinking to myself, one kind of general principle that I like to apply to how to treat others is the principle that you should not treat other conscious beings as means to your own ends, but you should treat them as ends in themselves.
Yeah.
And when you eat an animal that used to be conscious before it was slaughtered, regardless of whether it was slaughtered in the most humane way, you're already treating it as a means to your own ends.
Yeah.
The ends here being, nutrition or good taste or whatever. And so I decided that that it's wrong to eat the meat of conscious animals. Unconscious animals are okay in my book, but conscious animals, it's wrong to eat both their meat and their products, because the products, it's also part of, it's also a way of treating them as a means to your own ends.
Right.
And so I my first thought was, no way I can go without meat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided, all right, but maybe I can do like 6 days out of 7.
Mm-hmm.
That's like 83% of my life. It's 83% of the good that I can do.
Yeah.
I can do. And then once a week I'll have I'll have my meat so that I don't have to represent to myself, oh my God, never meat again.
Right.
And so I did that for a couple of years. And then after a couple of years, I said to myself, I think I'm ready to go full. I call this zombitarianism, with the idea that zombie animals that are not conscious, you can eat.
And I have to ask you, what you're gonna have to list those animals that are unconscious.
I knew this was coming, but and we'll get there. So I went full zombitarian without exceptions for 4 years, and then I met my wife, and she loves to cook, and so I again do like an exception once a week. We eat meat.
To this day?
Yeah.
So you're vegetarian 6 days a week?
Zombitarian.
Zombitarian.
Which is
I've never heard that word. I love it.
I invented
love that
it.
you coined that term.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about it.
All right. So, you want to know about how you decide whether an animal is conscious?
Yeah.
So the thing is, no one can know for sure.
Of course.
I, in fact, cannot know for sure, for absolutely sure, that you're conscious.
Of course.
In fact, my 6-year-old son, whom you met at
I
American
did meet
Time.
him. Yeah, he's cute.
Thank you. He, like a month ago, he asked me, Dad, how do I know that you're real and not just a moving sculpture?
Woo!
So he was like realizing there's no,
Yes.
you only feel your own consciousness.
Yeah.
It's every person's consciousness is private to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see like external symptoms of consciousness when you talk. This all looks like a conscious being,
Yeah.
but it cannot be ruled out that you're a moving sculpture, or
Of course.
a zombie. And so it's extra difficult with animals to basically you can't be sure. So what you can do is generate the best hypothesis
Right.
that you can come up with. And here's the way that I've decided on what is the best way to come down on a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
First, you need to figure out because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the brain. A lot of neurochemicals buzzing around between neural cells. Some of this activity in the brain goes with consciousness, with conscious awareness. Some doesn't.
Right.
You need to figure out what separates the two. What's the special thing
Yeah.
that makes something in your mind conscious. And then once you know that, you look for the thing in the brain that is present whenever consciousness is present and is absent whenever consciousness is absent.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take that. Once you've discovered that, you take that and you go to animals and you look in their brains to see whether their brains have these kinds of structures that in us are the seat of consciousness.
Right.
Now, this is not a foolproof procedure for more than one reason, but it's kind of a reasonable way to go about.
It's a very earthly, materialistic method of going about it.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of assumptions behind it.
Yes, I confess to it.
As in you are assuming with this sort of hypothesis that consciousness is solely a product of neurofunction.
Correct. Yeah.
And I mean, I have so many questions for you. To not necessarily about this, but everything related. And it's crazy that this is the first thing we talk about. And for those people who aren't listening, who don't know much about Uriah, and I don't know a ton, but I did read about you and read your biography. Uriah focuses on, in his study, consciousness, and what contributes to consciousness, and everything analogous to that. And Armin and Armin is not here for those who are listening. Armin had a bit of a back problem, so he's sitting this one out. Literally can't even sit down to sit it out. But we talk about this every day, literally every day, because we're so confounded every day that we're here and we're experiencing, and it's all arbitrary, and it's weird, and it's painful, and there's suffering, but there's also a lot of good, no doubt about that.
So it's fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Imagine now monetizing all your ruminations.
Yeah.
Being able to get a check in the mail.
I mean,
for like sitting around and thinking about consciousness.
Right. And you do that.
I'm really lucky.
Yeah, I mean, you do much more tangible things than that. But, that's kind of a reason why we wanted to found this podcast to an extent. Because, one, Armin and I have so much in common about music. But music brought us literally together randomly at a gig. He got called to play. I got called to play, just duo. And then we play a set. It goes fine, whatever. It's great music. But then we're sitting down and we're talking, and we start speaking in hushed tones about the things that you kind of, aren't necessarily supposed to be talked about in general society. And we're like, oh, okay. We're like, cosmic brothers. And so now we're here. Now we're living together.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Once you your souls met, did the music become better?
Yeah, I would say that it did. And
you didn't say it with great conviction, I must say. You
right.
paused for a second.
You're right. I mean, in all honesty, I feel like the music was just there already. The great music was there already, and every time that we play since then, I feel like it's always great. We agree that it's always great. Of course, there are technical things that we have to work on and arrangements and all this kind of stuff, but the soul and the communication and the commonalities regarding music, we have all that. And we have a couple other members of our band who are on the same sort of wavelength. But, regarding consciousness, I personally look at consciousness. I don't say anything definitively because you can't. And anybody who does say anything definitively, say, I know for a fact that I'm going here. I'm like, come on, man.
You know what I learned in philosophy, especially working in philosophy of consciousness? People ask me, what is your view? So, for example, you asked me, are you assuming that consciousness is solely a product of neurochemical processes in the brain? Mm-hmm. And I said yes. What I should have said is, yes, this is an assumption of what I just said. This method of zooming in on what might be the animals that are conscious. But usually when people ask me, they put to me a proposition like that. Do you think consciousness is solely the product of neurochemical processes? My answer will always have the following shape. I have 57% credence that it is and 43% credence that it's not.
Okay.
And in every area of philosophy, I don't think to myself, do I think this is true or false anymore? This is how I used to think.
Uh-huh.
Now I think, what is the credence distribution I am most comfortable with here? What percentage of conviction to assign to each of the possibilities? And the possibility, for a possibility to get 100%, that never happens.
Right.
And 0%, it only happens when you have a logical contradiction. If I said,
right,
this is both blue and not blue, that I can give it a credence of 0. But other than that, whenever you say anything meaningful, I'll give it more than 0 and less than 100.
Is the 57 specific or arbitrary?
It is trying to put a number on a feeling.
Okay.
And so it's arbitrary to an extent,
okay.
but it's not like plucked out of thin air
Right.
either. It's like my best sense of my own confidence.
I completely understand that. That is a good way to put it, putting a number to a feeling. Yeah, and it gets taken into other places, especially when you have certain experiences, certain personal phenomenological experiences that make you think something. And I feel like I've personally had experiences which have shown me, only me, and some people who are on that telepathic wave with me in that moment, that consciousness might be more of a pervading universal energy wave, where there's a great image where it's like you have all these bodies, you have your body, my body, another body, and there's a thin line connecting each person, and it's inside of us, and it's just pervading everything. And you know, Armin and I talk a lot, and even our other bandmate Corey Wilson, who's part of this procedure, talk a lot about synchronicity, and I'm sure you're familiar with synchronicity. And we have so many synchronicities, and I'm very objective too. I really try to fact check everything. And we have some that are just unexplainable. And to me, that's an example of a global sort of consciousness, or this pervading energy where we're all channeling some vibration or something. There's no words for it because I don't know, but I'm just the gist of it, that we're all on that same wavelength, and then we're creating it. And Armin and I swear we manifest things, because he and I will start to talk about things, or we'll be thinking about things, and then we'll see them happen. Not necessarily connected with us, but close to us. And every time that happens, it's like I get chills. Honestly, even you are a synchronicity to some extent, because I don't know you.
You make an espresso, next thing you know, we're talking about consciousness.
It's like, right. I make an espresso, you're at my house. I didn't know that you specialize in consciousness, and that's the exact conversation that I'm truly trying to have. Because Armin and I say it's like, small talk is boring. You know, we like to think pretty big, and
life is too short for small talk.
Right.
You know, a lot of what you say is very kind of Buddhist sounding to me.
Sure.
Or even Taoist. There are various like Eastern religions / philosophies that kind of, you know, go into these themes.
You know what I actually identify most with? What I realized is Sikhism.
Oh, really?
I find that I can't give you all the specifics because it was like a year ago that I really was into it, and I've gotten out of, so I'm just not able to say the specific words, but I know that when I was researching it and looking into it, I was like, wow, honestly, if I were to say I was any religion, I would maybe lean towards Sikhism, but I also just try generally not to align myself to anything.
You're gonna get a kick out of this. Last week, I walk around at the Humanities building on Rice campus, and I see a box of free books. In that file this under synchronicity. I see a box of free books in the history department. I kind of look. I see a book called a source book to world religions, or something like this. I say, well, I'll spend an hour or two like looking into this. I take it to my office. I sit there. So it goes to the 6 main best known religions, organized religions. And I say, all right, I know something about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism. I know something about each of these. Sikhism, the truth is, I know nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading the chapter on Sikhism
Oh,
and like
nice.
the original, the original 10 gurus.
Yeah.
And like their teachings. I
Mhm.
read some of their teachings, and I didn't go deep enough in those 2 hours to know that these themes are there.
Mhm.
But it looked pretty cool.
I think one of their big things is that all, and other religions say this as well, but I felt that Sikhism said it the way that I liked it. All is one at the end of the day, and that goes to with what I was saying about we're all the same consciousness expressed through different means. And even sometimes also I think that the brain does play a large part in consciousness, but more so than creating consciousness, as it might be the receptor that allows it to transmit through the body. And then I'm not saying it is that. That's just a feeling that I have. And then on top of that, sometimes you add certain chemicals, psychedelics mainly, more specifically dimethyltryptamine, DMT, and then you start to be like, all right, okay, really, what is consciousness? And maybe it's not all wishy-washy, like spiritual. Maybe it's literally, we have this, and DMT is a chemical doorway to another dimension, and you're here, and you're there, and they've studied it, and they're doing it. And I almost got Dr. Rick Strassman on here, who is the author of the book entitled The Spirit Molecule. And I know we're about to have Jeffrey Kripal on here. I'm sure you know Jeff. Yeah. And so I've spoken with him a lot about this kind of stuff as well.
You have an appetite for 5 minutes of a stream of a chain of reasoning, let's say.
Yeah.
That may or may not please you.
Please.
So the big issue with the kind of outlook that you're laying out is it smacks of mysticism and anti-scientific thinking.
Oh, of course.
Now, but what's interesting is that there have been some kind of in very recent philosophy of consciousness, there have been some thought processes that led people to think that maybe actually it all sits fine with science, and here's how.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at science, start with at the most basic level of particle physics.
Mm-hmm.
You have the different particles, the fermions and the bosons and all their properties of mass and all that, charge and all that stuff. When you read a physics textbook, it won't tell you what is the essence of mass or charge. It will tell you, here's how mass of such and such interacts with charge of such and such.
Mm-hmm.
Here are all the laws that tell you how one quantity interacts with another quantity.
Mm-hmm.
It does not say what these quantities are which interact with each other. And some people have thought, since we seem unable to understand how brute matter can produce consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
maybe what it is that in each of these quantities, like the mass of an electron, there's going to be a mini consciousness.
Right.
And this mini consciousness, when it comes together with enough mini consciousness like that,
Mm-hmm.
in a brain, let's say, it produces the kind of consciousness that you and I experience.
Right.
Now, there is a kind of a problem. How do mini consciousnesses merge? The composition of individual conscious awareness like you and I have from many consciousnesses is a totally mysterious thing. So some people have thought maybe there actually isn't any composition of individual consciousness from mini consciousness. What there is a cosmic universal consciousness,
Right.
and there is a decomposition of it into individual consciousnesses like yours and mine. And this is how it all works. And this is consistent with science, because science actually doesn't really say anything about the nature of mass or the nature of charge, the nature of an electron. It just says how these things interact.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a bunch of equations about how these things connect to each other,
Right.
but not about the intrinsic nature of each of them.
Right.
So this is the end of my 5-minute speech.
And, that is actually pretty much what I was saying, in the sense, it's just a different way of saying it, or maybe it sounds more technical, whereas it decomposes into individual consciousnesses. And that's what I'm saying, where it is one giant energy, something field, something like that, expressed individually. And maybe that's through decomposing. And I know really specifically Albert Hoffman, the inventor of LSD, and why am I blanking? Who wrote The Doors of Perception?
Yeah,
Aldous Huxley,
yeah.
right? Thought that the brain was a receiver based on the experiments that they ran with their own brains and other people. And even, it's reminiscent of mediums. Not that I'm really on that so much, like mediums and psychics. I do think that there's something to it. There's something called the Law of One. Are you familiar with that? The Law of One were these texts that were recorded in the 70s. Basically, there's this woman. She was able to channel a specific entity, extra-dimensional entity, and let it speak through her. I would say to anybody who's listening or thinks about it, go read it for yourself. Don't let me talk about it, because it sounds willy-nilly and it sounds kind of fake, and I am very suspicious of everything. But when I read it, I also thought, wow, that's interesting. And I feel like the rabbit hole always continues. On top of all this, you go back and you look at ancient texts. You look at the ancient Sumerians and what they were writing and what they were talking about, ancient Egyptians as well, and what they were saying about consciousness and about the mind and the power of the mind. And you're like, wow, it's fascinating. And how did we get here?
Which Sumerian texts are you talking about?
Okay. Enuma Elish. It's in the Enuma Elish, one of them. That's as specific as I can get right now.
Uh-huh.
I've done just so much listening about it.
Huh.
Not really my homework and not studying and taking notes, but definitely check out the Enuma Elish regarding that. But they even are talking about, another race of beings coming to Earth and actually creating humans. Like taking the genetics of the Anunnaki people, which are not from Earth, or essentially might be our future selves, and mixing it with ape genetics. I know that sounds crazy. I'm not saying I believe that, but
well, what you're talking about
there's
here
reason for it.
Is a young civilization, the first civilization,
Yeah.
the first urban civilization, and they're trying to make sense of the fact that it looks like humans. There's something different about humans, that they do things that other animals don't, and yet they are clearly animals. In some respects, they
Right.
seem like animals. They eat like animals do, and they sleep, and they have sex, and they act, and they die, and it's all like a life of an animal. And at the same time, it builds civilizations and palaces and irrigation systems in a way animals don't do. And
Or even the spirituality aspect. I feel like you could delete all that other stuff, the irrigation, the civilization, and there's this spark of something else that is slightly different? Maybe a spark of awareness, something like that.
I was thinking, look, awareness there would be in animals too.
It is.
In most animals.
It is.
And so I was thinking more that it's in the process of trying to make sense of human life, how it's different and how it's the same.
Sure, yeah.
From everything you see around, it is like the first civilization to get organized. That spirituality emerges in the process of trying to make sense of what you see around you.
Yeah,
this
great point.
was sort of my thought process. And when you read the Epic of Gilgamesh from the Sumerians, which is in fact the earliest literary work we know about from 4,000 years ago, it seems like the story is mostly about what is a human and what is death and what is life. And the way I read it, this idea that a human is one part God, one part animal, two parts something in between, and you get these four parts, and then you get yourself a human. And this is like part of just trying to make sense of what you observe around you. I don't know much about Egyptian civilization more than the things that are known in popular culture. But the Sumerian ones I've always been fascinated by, because it's the first people to build cities and invent writing, and the wheel was invented there, and the trade came online, so to speak, in that. So it's a kind of an amazing quantum leap in the history of the cosmos,
and that
where the Sumerian civilization comes on.
And you can see these beings. Have you ever heard of Graham Hancock?
No.
Graham Hancock is a really interesting historian who focuses on this kind of stuff. It's literally a mixture of, study of consciousness, but mixed with history, and then seeing where that plays into it. And the Anunnaki, which is this builder race that comes from another place, for that helps the advancement of humans, you actually see them in different art all over the world at ancient sites, whether it's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, I believe, or in the Middle East or something like that. And what is interesting is they're always depicted with these bags. They're always bringing these bags, and they kind of liken that to the bringing of information and stuff like that. And what was really interesting about the Law of One, take it with a grain of salt, is that the entity that she was channeling, there were two men asking questions to her, but speaking to the entity. And they said, how were the pyramids built? Because even to this day, there's no answer. There's no good answer. And they said that they were, at that point, the collective consciousness was so strong in this community that they were actually able to use their mind to harness the energy within the earth and move the rocks. I know. Sounds crazy, right? But when I first read that, I was like, wow, you know what? I don't know.
I think my skepticism here is higher than yours. One thing...
We need that.
One thing that... for me constrains a bit my thinking about consciousness is the remarkable phenomenon that changes in conscious experience. We don't know of changes in conscious experiences with nothing changing in the brain process, the underlying neural brain process.
Sure, yeah.
So it seems like there is this correlation that the two things are leashed to each other somehow.
Yes.
You don't have conscious stuff that's happening kind of unmoored, so to speak, from brain activity. And so this must be sort of a constraint that however you explain the processes of consciousness, it needs to make sense of the idea that there is something in the kind of brutish material reality
Right.
of like gray goo inside a skull
Mm-hmm.
that that is active and has to be active whenever anything happens at the level of conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of why my credence in the fact that the conscious processes are a product of the neural processes is higher than 50%,
Right.
because of this kind of apparently exceptionless regularity. Regularity without exceptions. There are no known cases of experiential changes in someone's mind unaccompanied by any neural changes in their brain.
Well, okay. What would you say to somebody having a near-death experience where their brain is, where they are dead and their brain is offline, and they are still having an extremely profound, completely true for them experience where they're conversing, they're at this place, they're watching even? What do you say to that?
You're right that there are cases where it's controversial whether there is this kind of correlation that I'm talking about. More cautiously, I should have said there are no cases where it's uncontroversial that experiential changes have occurred with no underlying neural changes in the brain.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Because these are kind of the subject of live debates, what to make of these reports. How much brain activity can survive while you call someone brain dead? How much reconstruction, reconstruction of pseudo memories can be attributed to a person?
Sure.
These are kind of things that are unresolved among specialists. I think Jeff Kripal will be able to talk to you about this more than I do. But this is sort of my source of skepticism. This
Sure.
kind of the fact that there is no uncontroversial cases of, experiential activity unmoored from brain activity.
And I agree with that actually to a great extent. And I feel like that also, that line of thinking plays into the brain acting as the proper receiver for the consciousness. And if the brain is slightly broken, then the consciousness is not going to transmit properly, potentially.
That's actually a very cool issue, because once you establish correlation between A and B, that doesn't yet prove that A causes B. It could
Right.
also be that B causes A.
Right.
And so it could be that the reason there is a correlation is that whenever consciousness is active, part of what it does is make neural processes take
Right.
place. This is something that cannot be ruled out just by citing correlations.
Right.
So that's a fair point.
If next year Apple said, we've got this new thing, there's too much coronavirus, everybody's getting sick, so we've made this thing where you can transmit your consciousness into it and you can live forever, you'll never get sick, and you can have bliss, would you do it? How about robot body? We'll make it simple. Apple robot body, no more COVID-19. Transmit your consciousness via firewire cable. I'm just joking. Into the robot.
I'd do it.
You do it.
Yeah.
Do you want your do you want this current state to live forever? Would you choose to live forever if you could?
Yes.
I'm not saying that we don't already live forever. We might. and not really be aware. But if you could be aware of living forever,
If you were guaranteed eternal life, immortality, would you take it? Some philosophers argue that it's irrational to want it because eventually you'll get to the state of eternal boredom. But I just can't buy it. And maybe it's a failure of imagination on my part.
right?
But I think I'd go for it in a heartbeat, really. Maybe it's a big mistake, but
It definitely scares me. Not scares, actually, worries me. It makes me think, I don't know my soul, whatever you want to call it, gives me a little warning that it might not be the right step. It feels a little bit like it's going away from our nature, but I also concede the point, I don't know. What if it's the right thing to do? What if we're supposed to do that and we're already on the path for it? But I also get worried because, we're being controlled. I just watched a little bit of this documentary called The Social Dilemma, which is about social media. And you have all these people who used to be really high up at Google, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, talking about, and I see it as I'm on Facebook, they can literally control you. They can make you act how they want you to act. They can make you buy what they want you to buy, or take in the information that they want you to take in. They can make you vote for who they want you to vote for. Did you vote?
I'm not a citizen. I cannot vote. If I could, I would vote for Biden.
I did not vote. My reason being, I don't support either party. My personal choice is that I don't support Donald Trump. I also don't support Joe Biden. I think we're being sold a generally false story. And, there's empirical evidence to say why. And I don't think that there is a lesser of two evils, and I don't know what's coming down the pipeline. And, for example, we're kind of on a different tangent right now. I saw a video the other day, an ad by Kamala Harris, and it's a cartoon, and it's talking about equality of opportunity. It's talking about equity, and then she talks about equality of outcome. And you're familiar with equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. And I think most people who have thought about it and actually know what they're talking about say that equality of outcome is actually a very dangerous idea. Would you agree with that?
I would give some credence to it.
I would say also personally some.
Yeah.
How about be weary of that idea?
There's issues of unintended consequences in this.
Yes.
That it would be very interesting and self-challenging, I think, to live in a world where doing better than the other, that just is taken out of the equation. Doing better than your neighbor, having the greener whatever, and that whole thing that drags human life downwards, I would think,
it does,
is taken out of the equation. It could actually be challenge people to get something more substantial out of their lives. And if can I say also something?
Yeah.
Rather than not vote, why are you on Facebook? Why are you on these things?
Solely.
What is the value? I'm not talking about entertainment value, even so. I'm personally, so I'm not on any of these things.
That's good.
I was on them for a little bit, got bored, saw that there is no real value that's added to my life, quite a bit of disvalue, and that a lot of it seems to me also, instead of people living their real life, they're projecting these personas that they curate, that's with unblemished happiness and all that.
Yep.
What is the point of that? What is the point of curating an unreal kind of me instead of living your life? why are you on Facebook instead of getting off and voting?
Right. Well, I feel like those actually are two different things. I was off Facebook my junior year specifically because I felt so much negativity from it, and I wasn't using it as a tool as much, but rather just utilizing it how they intended it, me living some sort of life. And Armin and I were just having this conversation last night. It's like we have two lives at this point. We have a virtual life, a virtual Facebook life, and then we have our real life, and we should live our real life. The sole reason why I'm on Facebook, I don't have a personal Instagram. I run the Houston Ensemble Instagram right now with Armin, is solely to let people know where the music is happening, actually. And I would tell everybody, while I was in Amsterdam studying abroad, I didn't have Facebook, and it was one of the greatest times ever. And I was out of the know. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't see events happening, but it didn't matter because somebody who had it told me about it, or I just found out about it or something like that.
I accept as a legitimate reason.
Yeah. And so, we have our jazz night tonight at Mercantile Coffee Shop, 7 to 9. And I got to go on there every Tuesday, and I got to post our flyer so that people who live in Katy know, hey, if I want, there is some jazz tonight, because it's the only place that it's really going to be published besides our website.
That makes sense.
So,
I forget that this does not apply to me because I'm lucky in that way.
And to share your podcast, so when your podcast is published, I'm going to want, and by the way, this is one of my favorites, honestly, that we've done so far. So when your podcast is published, we, boost it a lot. Not literally like with the boost button, but I'm just saying we share it a lot, and I want people to know about it. And I want people to have some way of finding you and hearing what you're saying and hearing our discussion and then going about it and thinking about it at home. But beyond that, I'm not a fan.
So you promise me that you're not like sitting there when you're bored? Here you are. It's like 11 p.m. You're not tired. You're bored. Let's scroll through Instagram and look at pictures, and that's how you spend a half an hour before you know it. No value was produced during this half an hour for anybody, really.
Yeah, honestly, no.
All right,
at
then
this
I
point,
accept it.
At this point, I used to. I absolutely used to, and that's why I got rid of my personal Instagram.
Me too.
Because I was just so consumed, especially with like fun conspiracy things. I love it. And also, I mean,
spot for it.
I think there's a lot that actually needs to be talked about. But yeah, so we don't even follow many people on the Houston Ensemble one. So there's nobody for me to really look at. And all I do is just say, hey, we're playing here tonight. Love to see you.
What I'm thinking sometimes, by the way, is I wish I could live not only before, Facebook and Instagram and all that, but before TV, before radio. When you got to the point where you're starting to feel bored and like not sure what to do with yourself and a kind of existential void that you can't run away from that.
Yeah.
That's
a very interesting point.
I think that's why Instagram and all that is so addictive, because those feelings are real. They are part of the human condition.
Yes.
And instead of dealing with them and like digging in there, we say, well, I feel like I'm starting to get in touch with something uncomfortable. And so let's run away from that and look at some stupid picture.
Some animalistic cats. I was going to say some animalistic pictures, because what it's really steeped in is steeped in consuming and sex, and those are the main things. Now, I love Instagram for art. Instagram, it's like, wow, through Instagram, I have seen some of the most amazing artists that I don't know where else I would have seen them, or like tattoo artists, this tattoo. I got it. I followed the artist who is Korean, who lives in Seoul. I followed them before, and then I got the gig to go to Korea, and then I'm in Korea, and I said, oh, now I can go get one of his tattoos because I knew him from Instagram.
That's cool.
So in that sense, it's positive. But that's about it.
So yeah, one cannot say that it's like zero positive and
Right.
a gazillion negative. It's just that the negative seems to dwarf the positive to me.
Especially today.
And you know, it's not like I'd never run away from that moment where you kind of start wondering about like what's the point of living and all that. I put on Netflix, I watch a movie, not Netflix, but there's something that we get through Rice called Canopy.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
Netflix, but more interesting to me. And so I do, or like, you know, I'll just read something instead of like staying with those uncomfortable feelings. So it's not like I never run away from it. But I think the temptation to do it is less strong when there isn't this very easy stimulant, like brain stimulant on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I definitely struggle with that question probably every day. Why are we here? And there's actually nothing to do. You know, at the end of the day, it's like there's nothing to do. And you do have to create something to do. And this is a version of creating something to do because I want to contribute somehow, personally. I also think that a lot of people battle with, well, why don't I just kill myself? There's not a point. And for me, my answer to that is, you know what? I get that. I feel that. I'm going to give it the old college try. I'm just going to try. It's like, what's the harm in sticking it out, trying, learning something?
Yeah, to me, suicide is a bit too affirmative.
It's very
too,
affirmative.
like, you know that this is the right thing to do. Whereas,
yes, you say you know by committing suicide.
Exactly,
I know that what's on the other side is better than what I have right now.
Yeah,
and you
like
actually
that.
don't.
No, and so I'm with you there, and I'm also, I like the way you put it. There's nothing to do, by which I imagine you mean something like, there's nothing that's really valuable that is likely to come out of my life. So, you know, some people, there's something, you know, I feel like artists are an exception.
Mm-hmm.
Artists produce like genuine value.
Mm-hmm.
And so you should feel good about that. But most human life, if you take like the history of the cosmos and like what part of it humans existed, and you look at all the humans that existed from the first, you know, humans 200,000 years ago to like the humans that exist now, the number of the humans that you can just like imagine, like the whole history of the cosmos identical, except I'm plucking that guy out and like assume your existence was not happening.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that for the crushing majority of people, it makes no difference to anything.
Correct.
And I must assume this is true of my life, that it makes absolutely no difference to anything, and that I am not likely to produce anything. So maybe it's true of Einstein, that if you pluck him out, it actually makes some difference to our understanding of the world. In a way, the cosmos understanding of itself through humans. Or, you know, some great philosophers like Aristotle, or some, you know, some great thinkers, but and I would add artists. But for most of humanity, what difference does it really make?
Totally.
And so in that sense, there is nothing to do.
Yeah.
And now the question is, if you agree there's nothing to do, and on the other hand, that there is an element of hubris in suicide because it's a bit too affirmative, like you know something that in fact you don't know. So what do you do next? Where do you go from here? Given that you've agreed that your life is probably plus or minus to the world, makes no difference if you get to live your life or not. And on the other hand, you don't want to commit suicide. What do you do?
Well,
in your case, you're looking at like 60, 70 years to...
I just think that I really think about it a lot. And I especially think about it in this time period because I just graduated, in May. And graduating in a weird time where, the world is... You don't even know what to believe with anything. And you maybe can't even go anywhere in some cases. And then I'm thinking, wow, okay, so actually I have nothing to do and nowhere to go. So for me...
But that's actually cool because it challenges you to sit with those thoughts.
I'm actually free. Yeah. For me, I feel free.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard because I still have to work to, pay the bills and be able to live here. Yeah. Something like that. But I'm trying to just follow my heart. And I think if everybody can just follow their heart to an extent, that's going to help. And I think that I really believe, and this is what I was getting at earlier about manifesting stuff. I really do believe that you can create your own reality. And I feel like based on your whole experience and story, you might agree with that as well. Following your heart, going where you want to go, living where you want to live.
Well, I feel like one of the tricky things about life is that there are two things that are true at the same time. One is that you're free. And whenever you are saying, I don't really want to do it, but I have to do it,
mm-hmm.
it's you're pretending that you're unfree when in fact you're free because it suits you at some level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something true about life. The truth is you're completely free.
Yeah.
And it's all a matter of priorities.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's true that the world is out there and you do not control it. And if you walk straight into the wall rather than where the door is, and want to get to the other room without opening the door, but just walking through the wall, it won't work.
Right.
So there is a kind of a brute resistance to the will.
Yeah.
That's kind of just radical, uncontrollable part of the cosmos that you have to accept too.
Mm-hmm.
And so both of these, this is the tricky thing about life. Both of these are true. That there is a kind of a radical freedom that we have, and a radical kind of resistance. And you kind of have to somehow make sense of your existence inside with both of these truths.
Yeah. And another thing that I forgot to add to the freedom and going where you want to go is I've also, I don't know, probably not traveled as much as you, but I've traveled a lot, I think, for somebody my age. And I've been to a lot of different places by myself. And I feel like it's especially profound in Asia, whether it be Taiwan or Korea or Japan, being by myself. I'm at this point where I feel like the world is actually my playground.
Yeah.
And I don't feel scared. I don't feel scared or alone when I'm walking by myself through Japan all day, but like at night or anything like that, or a crazy part of San Francisco alone or something like that on my first time there. And I really and then what it also does is it makes me remember, we're all the same. We are different culturally, of course, but we are all the same at the end of the day. And I'm just here on this ball, and I'm just going to run around, and I want to experience all of it, and I want to go everywhere. And that is kind of my goal. Hopefully take our music and travel with it. But then also at the same time, something that's close to our heart is just helping other people. And like right now with the Houston Ensemble, we were trying to do this thing on most weekends where we just feed people that don't have enough to eat. And
how and where? Tell me about it.
So the first, let me pause that. That's funny. The first two times we did it, we've done it 5 times thus far. we bought, just out of our pocket, bought a bunch of bread, peanut butter, jelly, bananas, stuff like that, make a bunch of sandwiches, and then just go to areas where we know that there are a lot of homeless people that don't have a lot to eat, and then just hand them out.
Hand sandwiches to them.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool.
I just want to take it into my own hands. Yeah. I don't want to go through an organization.
Yeah.
I don't want to give money to an organization that I don't know where it's going.
Who knows, like, what the CEO is making.
Right.
His, non-profit.
And then another cool thing that happened is my other roommate, who's not here, who you did not see yet, he is working at a place called Sinful Bakery, and they're an all-vegan bakery. He's also vegan. And she donated over 100 pounds of granola to us. You've been to Rice Coffee House?
What's the Rice Coffee House?
You know, in the RMC, the little coffee shop
yes,
in the RMC.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you ever seen those bars in there? They're like granola thick rectangles. Anyway, that's they're from Sinful Bakery.
Oh.
If you ever go again, check it out. And it's like the best granola you will ever eat. But she gave us over 100 pounds, and now we have this partnership with her where she gives us excess food, and then we no longer have to spend so much money out of our own pocket, and then we just bag it and give it out.
That's really cool. But let me ask you, do you ever get like people kind of suspicious? We're talking about homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
So...
like truly down and out.
Right. And do you get... because sometimes with the people I've come across downtown, sometimes they're not all there. It's like after many years of meth. And because usually with the teeth, you know which is a case of meth. And some old people, kind of no one is really taking care of them for a long time. They're not all there. Don't you have people who are just suspicious of, like, is there like poison in these sandwiches or
I have
whatever?
a funnier answer. No. Not suspicious in the sense that we're going to kill them. They're actually 98% of people are actually super grateful. And I think this also plays into this consciousness aspect, this universal consciousness, where not always, it's not a blanket statement, where sometimes you can feel the intent behind people's actions. And I think that the majority of the time people really understand, they can literally feel the energy coming off of us that we just want to help them. Well, what's funny is that they're picky. They'd be like, what is this? And I'm like, it's granola. It didn't happen many times, but it did happen with the granola. And they called it brown. Only a couple people, 2 people. They called it brown shit. They said, what's that brown shit? And I was like, it's actually the best granola you're ever going to eat in your entire life. So you don't have to take it. I don't care. We'll give it to somebody else. And there are plenty of channels for people to get food.
That's a very cool idea.
But we started a GoFundMe last week because food is easy. We want to give people food, but I honestly think that people can get food. We're using our GoFundMe donations to get coats and blankets and like tampons. That's really hard for the homeless community, and socks, things that really matter, especially when we're coming in the cold. So if you know anybody that wants to donate to the GoFundMe, that would really help.
That's cool.
But yeah, we just want to, and wherever we go, my vision is that wherever we go internationally or nationally, it's like, for example, we're going to LA. We're going to LA and we're going to do a show. And let's say we have fans. Be like, all right, guys, how about this afternoon? We're all going to get together before the show, or maybe the day after the show or something. And we're going to take care of people. Whether it means feed them, clothe them, help them do something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a cool way to leverage, fandom. I imagine, and this is just, my age. Imagine if Nirvana in the 90s were like, everybody, we'll do a show. Part of the ticket is you come before the show with us.
Yes.
And you...
That's essentially what I'm talking about.
That's a really cool
Not
idea.
an ultimatum, but It'd be cool if you made it an ultimatum.
A bit too much of an ultimatum. But
Yeah, but that's, because I feel I won't be 100% fulfilled, and that's just me. And actually, I think it's the rest of the guys in the Houston ensemble as well. So, and I'm not even trying to be sappy about it. I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to virtue signal. I'm just saying, like, what else is there to do?
Yeah, whatever. You're modeling something that's good.
And I think that the baseline morality is just do to others what you would want done to yourself, and preferably don't harm anybody for no reason.
Yeah, ideally.
All
right.
This is perfect.
Wrap it up?
Yeah. All right, everybody.
What's the time?
Uriah Kriegel, Houston Ensemble Podcast. Thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. Amazing talk today. And check out his works. You can go on his website. We'll link it in the description. He's got a lot of papers that he's written. Really amazing guy. And we'll see you next time for episode 14, Houston Ensemble Podcast.